When most people think about history, they imagine facts set in stone dates, names, victories, defeats. But history, especially the kind taught in classrooms, is rarely just a neutral record of the past. It is a story. And stories are shaped by who tells them, who funds them, who approves them, and who benefits from them. In the United States, millions of students grow up reading textbooks that promise objectivity, balance, and truth. Yet beyond American borders, many of those same stories are viewed as incomplete, softened, or carefully framed. This gap is one of the central reasons why American history is increasingly questioned, challenged, and sometimes openly rejected around the world. American textbooks often begin with ideals: freedom, opportunity, progress. These themes are not false, but they are selective. They guide students towards seeing the nation as a moral project, constantly improving, constantly correcting itself. That framing shapes identity. It teaches students not just what happened, but how to feel about what happened. Over time, this creates a powerful national self-image, one that emphasizes intention over impact. And that distinction matters because outside the United States, history is often judged less by ideals and more by consequences. From the very beginning, this difference is visible. The arrival of Europeans in the Americas is commonly introduced as exploration or discovery. The language is careful, even optimistic: new worlds, new beginnings. But to much of the world, particularly indigenous communities and Latin American nations, this framing erases an entire reality. These lands were not empty. They were inhabited by complex societies with governance systems, trade routes, spiritual traditions, and histories stretching back thousands of years. When American textbooks minimize that reality, it signals something larger, that the story is being told from the deck of the ship, not from the shore. This pattern of selective emphasis continues with colonization. Violence, forced displacement, and disease are often acknowledged, but frequently compressed into brief summaries. The long-term consequences, the collapse of populations, the destruction of cultures, the reshaping of entire continents are rarely given the same narrative weight as European ambition or perseverance. Outside the United States, this imbalance is seen as a foundational distortion. It explains why many countries reject American moral authority when it speaks about justice, sovereignty, or human rights. Slavery is another turning point. In U.S. classrooms, it is usually presented as a tragic contradiction within an otherwise freedom-oriented nation. The focus often shifts quickly toward abolition, civil war, and eventual progress. What is less emphasized is how deeply slavery was embedded in the American economy, how it fueled global trade, and how its legacy shaped social and political systems long after emancipation. In Africa and the Caribbean, slavery is not a sidebar. It is the central chapter. When American textbooks downplay that centrality, critics interpret it not as ignorance but as discomfort. This discomfort becomes more visible in the 20th century as the United States emerges as a global power. World War II is often taught as a clear moral struggle, and in many respects it was. But the clarity of that narrative sets expectations. When the story moves into the Cold War, textbooks frequently frame American actions as defensive responses to external threats. Communism becomes the primary lens. What fades into the background are the experiences of countries caught between superpowers. In Iran, the overthrow of a democratically elected government in 1953 is not an abstract Cold War maneuver. It is remembered as a turning point that reshaped the nation's relationship with the West. In Guatemala, Chile, Congo, and elsewhere, similar interventions are taught not as strategic necessities, but as violations of sovereignty. American textbooks often mention these events briefly, if at all. But in the countries that lived through them, they define generations. This difference in memory explains why some countries actively challenge American historical narratives. History is not just about the past. It is about legitimacy in the present. When American leaders speak about democracy and stability, other nations measure those words against lived experience. Challenging textbook narratives becomes a way to reclaim agency, to say our version matters too. The Vietnam War illustrates this divide clearly. In the United States, it is often framed as a lesson, a costly mistake that taught humility. The focus tends to rest on American soldiers, domestic protest movements, and political fallout. In Vietnam, the war is remembered through civilian suffering, environmental destruction, and national trauma. Neither perspective is inherently wrong, but the imbalance reveals whose pain was centered and whose was marginalized. As decades pass, these omissions accumulate. They shape how Americans understand their country's role in the world and how the world understands America. Support for authoritarian regimes during the Cold War is frequently contextualized as pragmatic. Abroad, it is remembered as betrayal. Textbooks that emphasize outcomes over methods make it easier to believe in a consistent moral arc. From the outside, that arc appears fragmented. It is important to understand that American textbooks are not unique in this practice. Every nation curates its past. What makes the United States different is scale. American culture, media, and education reach globally. Its version of history travels far and is closely examined. In an age of digital archives, leaked documents, and global media, competing narratives are no longer confined to borders. This is why some countries invest heavily in counter-narratives, alternative textbooks, state-funded documentaries, museum exhibits that directly contradict Western accounts. These efforts are not just about history. They are about power. Undermining a dominant narrative weakens soft power. It challenges moral authority. It reframes global conversations. For American students, the cost of partial history often appears later in life, when they encounter foreign perspectives that feel hostile or confusing. For the world, the cost is mistrust. Dialogue becomes harder when foundational assumptions differ. Honest history does not weaken a nation, it complicates it. And complexity, while uncomfortable, is often closer to reality. The question, then, is not whether American history should inspire pride. It is whether pride can coexist with honesty. A nation strong enough to confront its past without editing it gains credibility, not loses it. Because when history is simplified for comfort, others will fill in the missing chapters. And once they do, the story is no longer controlled by textbooks, but by a global audience comparing notes. If history is a mirror, the question is not what we want to see, but whether we are willing to look long enough to see it clearly.